My only son said, "You'll eat after everyone else." Those words hit the kitchen tile like a heavy pan. I still hear them sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the lamp throws long shadows on the wall. He said it with a laugh, but the laugh was cold. His name is Tom. He is my boy, and yet that night he treated me like I was a stranger. It was Sunday. The air smelled of roast and rosemary. I had been in the kitchen since dawn, my hands steady though my back ached. I browned the meat until the skin was gold. I rolled mashed potatoes like little moons. I made the gravy until it shone. The house had laughter in it that morning, children running, plates clinking, a radio playing old country songs. I had made this dinner because that was what I did. I fed people. I fed them for years. But the moment came when Tom stood by the table and turned to me. He looked at his wife, Sarah, then at the children, and then he looked at me like an accusation. He said, "Mom, you'll eat after everyone else." For a second I thought he was joking. For a second I laughed with the others and lifted a dish. But his voice did not change. His jaw did not move. The room went quiet around me, and the light seemed to sharpen into a knife. I felt something break inside. Not just pride, something older, deeper. I thought of all the nights I had gotten up to wash dishes, to mend school shirts, to whisper prayers over sick beds. I thought of the years I carried 2 jobs and a house and a boy with dreams. I thought of my mother's hands and how they taught me to give. Therefore, when Tom sat down and began to pile his plate high, I took a breath and did something he did not expect. I walked to the roast, picked up the platter with both hands, and carried it out the back door. Everyone watched. The chatter stopped like a film cut. Sarah's pretty face drained color. The children froze mid-bite. Tom stood, his mouth open, the spoon still in his hand. "Mom," he shouted, half anger, half plea. But I did not stop. I went down the back steps with the roast against my chest. The sky was late blue, the yard smelled of grass and wet earth, and the old oak tree stretched its arms like a witness. I set the platter on the garden table, took a slow breath, and looked back at the house. Those faces at the window looked small and shocked and not a little guilty. I do not tell this to glorify myself. I tell this because that moment was the hinge of my life. I had been taught to be small. I had been taught to be grateful for crumbs. But I had reached a place where crumbs would not be enough anymore. Therefore, I chose one loud, simple thing. I would not be last. The children knocked at the glass and pounded tiny fists. Tom came to the door and begged. He said things that sounded like apologies, but they were thin. He told me that the roast was for the family, that tradition was tradition, that mothers should be patient and humble. He reminded me of the good I had done. He reminded me of how much he loved me. His voice broke sometimes, and some part of me softened. But my hands were steady because my heart had decided. Therefore, I set a place for myself at the garden table. I placed a napkin, cutlery, a small vase with a single dandelion. I put a chair that had once been my husband's, the one that creaked when you sat, and I Saturday. I carved a slice of meat for myself. I tasted the roast and it was perfect, salt and thyme and the warmth of a whole morning's work. The kitchen laughter came through the open window like a melody from a different life. I ate slowly, like someone learning to breathe again. But eating alone did not make me feel lonely. It made me feel honest. It made me remember who I was when no one watched. A woman who had taught children to read, who had tended neighbors through storms, who had kept a house of love and rough hands. Eating at that small table was a small victory. It was a line drawn in the dirt, not an end to love, but an end to being invisible. After I finished, I packed the platter and walked back toward the house. Tom was on the porch, his shoulders low, his eyes wet. He opened his mouth to say something. I looked at him and said, "You told me I would eat last." Therefore, I did something about it. If you want me at your table, then you must place me there. Otherwise, I will make my own table. He did not answer. He watched me and then went inside. The door closed. The plates were washed. The radio played another country song. Life went on, but something had shifted. The air between us felt different, not lighter, but clearer. I sat by the sink after the storm, hands in warm water, and watched the bubbles slip away. I thought about the years that had led to this strange small rebellion. I thought about Tom as a boy with skinned knees and a bright laugh. I thought about the nights I had whispered, "Eat, my child, while I wait." But you must know, child, that this was not the end. Actions echo. Choices gather meaning. Therefore, as I laid that roast down on my own table and set my chair, I did not imagine only peace. I trained my eyes for a different weather. I braced for a knock I both feared and secretly hoped for, a knock that would change everything or close the door forever. Child, let me take you back to that evening. The roast was finished, the dishes stacked high in the sink, and the house was too quiet. The children's laughter, which usually spilled like sunlight across the rooms, had gone cold. The clock on the wall ticked heavy, every second like a hammer. Therefore, I sat in my chair, the old one by the window, my hands folded tight in my lap. I told myself it was over, that tomorrow would look different, that maybe Tom would knock on my bedroom door and whisper, "I'm sorry, Mom." But sometimes, sorry comes too late, or it does not come at all. I must tell you, my child, that my heart beat like a drum that night because I knew something had changed. I had broken the silent agreement, the one that said I must always wait, always take less, always be small. And when you break such an agreement, the house feels it, the walls hear it, and the people cannot ignore it. The sky outside turned deep violet, the kind that makes you think of secrets. The air smelled of rain, though no storm had yet come. And then, as I sat alone in that silence, there came a knock at the back door. Not loud. Not gentle. A steady, measured knock, like someone testing the courage of their own hand. I rose slowly, every bone stiff, every step echoing. My shadow stretched across the old linoleum floor. And when I opened the door, there was Tom. My son. My only son. He stood there with his shoulders hunched, his face pale. He looked not like the strong man who had once carried me across a flooded street, but like the boy who used to stand guilty after breaking a window with his baseball. His eyes avoided mine at first, but when they lifted, they carried shame, anger, and something else, fear, maybe. "Mom," he said, his voice low. "You didn't have to do that." But I looked at him steady. "Tom, I had to. You left me no place at your table. Therefore, I built my own." He swallowed, his Adam's apple moving like it was dragging a stone. "Sarah's upset. The kids were crying. You embarrassed me." "Embarrassed you?" My voice cracked, but not from weakness. "I raised you on food that came from my hands when I had nothing left for myself. I went hungry so you could grow strong. I stood last in line so you could eat first. And you, my only son, told me to eat after everyone else, as if I am not part of the family I created with my own blood and bone." The porch light flickered above us, moths circling like restless thoughts. His face reddened, his lips trembled. He started to speak, then stopped. For a long moment, he was silent, only the sound of the crickets filling the space between us. Finally, he whispered, "I didn't mean it like that. I just thought it would be better that way." Better. The word cut me sharper than any knife. Better for who? Better for him to look strong in front of his wife. Better for Sarah to sit like a queen at the head of the table. Better for the children to think their grandmother was less than the rest. I leaned on the door frame, my heart steady now. "Tom, listen to me. Love is not built on pride. Respect is not given after everyone else has eaten. Respect is given first. If you cannot see that, then you will lose me. And you will lose more than you know. The truth, child, is that sometimes when a mother speaks, her words fly into the night and vanish. But sometimes, they land heavy, like stones in the heart. And I could see in his face that my words had landed. Still, he did not apologize. Not that night. He lowered his head, turned his back, and walked into the darkness. The sound of his footsteps on the gravel faded until all I heard again was the crickets. Therefore, I shut the door, bolted it, and leaned against it with my eyes closed. A single tear slipped down my cheek. Not just for the roast. Not just for the insult. But for all the years I had given, for all the nights I had been invisible, for all the times I had told myself, it's enough, you're loved, even if they don't show it. That night, I could not sleep. I sat by the window, watching the moon climb high, and I thought of my late husband, Frank. He would have never let me sit alone. He would have never told me to wait. I whispered to him, I hope you saw what I did tonight. I hope you know I am still the woman you married, the one who does not break easily. The next morning, the house was cold. Sarah barely looked at me. The children were polite but quiet. And Tom, he avoided me. He left early, muttering about work. Therefore, I decided something. I would not wait for their respect. I would not beg for a chair at their table. I would make my own way. And, child, that was the moment the seeds of my revenge were planted. Not revenge of anger, but revenge of dignity. Revenge that would not scream or strike, but would rise quietly, like a tree grown from roots of pain. Because I knew then, one day, Tom would come to me again, but not for roast, not for forgiveness. He would come for something bigger. And when he did, he would learn what it means to turn a mother into a stranger at her own table. Child, listen closely now, because this is the part of the story where everything changed. You've heard how your Uncle Tom told me I would eat after everyone else. You've heard how I walked out with the roast, how I drew the line that night, and how silence grew between us like a crack in old wood. But life has a way of turning its wheel. Time passed, not days, not weeks, but years. And therefore, the wound that began with a single sentence became a scar that would not fade. I lived quiet in this small house. I worked in my garden, I sewed for neighbors, I baked bread to sell at the church market. My hands, though old, kept busy, and my heart, though hurt, kept beating. And little by little, something unexpected happened. The garden grew more than vegetables. It grew into a business. Folks loved my pies, my preserves, my homemade bread. And what started as nickels in a jar became dollars in a tin, and then accounts in a bank. Therefore, while Tom's family spent money fast, bigger house, fancier car, expensive trips, I built mine slow, steady, quiet. My name became whispered in the church hall, that old lady's got herself a small fortune now. But I never said a word to Tom. He never asked. 15 years went by with only short visits on holidays, polite and stiff, never warm. Sometimes he hugged me with one arm, like a man already turning away. Sometimes Sarah looked at me like a shadow at the edge of her bright world. And the children grew into strangers. That, child, was the hardest loss of all. Still, I waited. Not with hope, hope had burned out, but with patience. I knew, therefore, that someday the wheel would turn back. And then it happened. One autumn night, just as the leaves turned copper, there came another knock at my door. It was not steady this time. It was urgent. I opened it, and there stood Tom. But not the proud Tom I remembered. This Tom's face was pale, his eyes tired, his clothes wrinkled. Behind him, Sarah stood wringing her hands, and behind her, the grandchildren, older now, taller, but with the same frightened eyes. "Mom," Tom said, his voice shaking. "We need your help." I said nothing. I let the silence work. He shifted from foot to foot like a boy again. Finally, he confessed, "We are broke. The business failed. The house is gone. We have nowhere else to turn. Do you see, child? The same man who once told me I was last at his table now came to beg for a seat at mine. Therefore, I led them inside. I set the table. I brought out bread, butter, and stew. They ate hungrily, too hungry for pride. I sat across from them, watching. And for the first time in 15 years, Tom looked me straight in the eyes. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm sorry." The words hung heavy in the air. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. The children watched, waiting for my answer. I could have raged. I could have thrown them out. But revenge, child, is not always about anger. It is about justice. It is about teaching. Therefore, I leaned forward and said, "Tom, once you told me I would eat after everyone else. Tonight, you sit at my table because I choose to share it. But remember this, a table is not just wood. It is respect. And the moment you take respect away, you lose the right to sit." His shoulders shook. He lowered his head. The children stared at their bowls, ashamed. After dinner, I gave them blankets for the night. But the next morning, when Tom asked if they could stay, I looked at him steady. "You may stay," I said, "but only if you learn. You will work in my garden, you will help bake my bread, you will know what it feels like to build from nothing. And your children will see that no one eats last when they give their heart and their hands. Otherwise, you must go." And do you know what, child? He stayed. He worked. Slowly, he changed. Pride softened. Gratitude grew. The children, who had once passed me by like a stranger, began to sit with me, to laugh, to listen. Therefore, the wheel had turned, but not to crush, to teach. My revenge was not to leave him hungry, but to let him taste humility, to let him understand the pain of being last, and then to give him the chance to rise again. And the moral is this, my child, never treat the hands that fed you as unworthy. For one day, those same hands may be the only ones left to feed you. So when you grow, when you have your own table, remember, no one who loves you should ever be asked to sit last. That is my story. That is the lesson. And that, my sweet one, is why tonight, you sit beside me.